I wanted to catch up with our Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Nick Coatsworth, because there's a lot to talk about in the wake of those weekend protests. Have turned out to be a bit of a natural experiment for the coronavirus pandemic in this country. I caught up with him a short time ago. Nick, thanks for joining us again. Look, I've got to say, I've had a pretty good lockdown. I've been going to work every day. I haven't had to make terrible sacrifices, as so many have made, losing their jobs, missing out on funerals, missing out on travel and catching up with loved ones. How did you feel about that dichotomy? People who have made those sacrifices, then watching others on the weekend gather in big groups in our cities?
Well, Chris, I think perhaps it's important not to treat it like a dichotomy. We have to acknowledge that there's been incredible sacrifice made by Australians who have taken their responsibility very seriously to combat COVID-19. Equally, there were obviously a group of very many passionate, in fact many thousands of very passionate people for a particular cause, and that is a right of a democratic society to protest. But I think there does need to be a balance between what we view as our rights and what we view as our responsibilities, and we will always live in a democratic society in Australia. That is what we believe in Australia as Australians. So there will be a time in the future that we can gather again to protest, but as we have said on Friday and as we say again, now is not the time. It wasn't the time over the weekend, and it won't be the time in the future so long as that risk of COVID-19 continues.
Let me just break that down into two distinct issues. The key one, of course, is your real focus is the health issue. It was a health risk to have that many people gathering together, presumably, because it's still outlawed in normal circumstances.
Chris, it is a health risk to have that many people gathering. That is absolutely clear. I think in a lot of ways it was clear to the people who were gathering that it is a health risk. It's hard to escape that reality, and we would simply ask those for whom they may be considering protesting again. I know there's some protests coming up in Western Australia. That they really consider how much of a health risk it actually is. We are in a pandemic. We've come so far in combating COVID-19, and we don't want to go backwards, and we don't want to go backwards even for causes that people feel very passionate about.
Well, the second aspect of this, though, of course, also goes to your responsibilities, but not just in a singular medical sense, but in the public health policy. And that is, what concerns do you have for the effect of this on the wider community? As you said, the public have bought into this. We've surrendered our rights to go to the footy, to go to the beach, to gather in crowds, to turn up in the workplace often. And yet when people see rules broken or exemptions given for people in a protest, it could undermine the public confidence and the public adherence to these public health rules.
Well, Chris, the thing we have to remember, of course, is that we don't tend to protest every Friday and Saturday night throughout the footy season. So the public health implications are different, but we are actually working towards looking at spectator sport and that sort of thing. We recognise how important that is for Australians. In terms of undermining confidence, I think Australians will see both sides of the story. They will have seen what was a tragic and seminal event in the United States, which has sparked widespread protests around the world. They will also see that there is an ongoing need to continue abiding by what the government has said and lifting the restrictions in a slow and cautious way. I hope it doesn't lead to too much frustration, Chris. I really don't, but Australians can be assured that as the Australian Health Protection Principal Committee, we are working towards lifting the restrictions in a way that balances their health with the resumption of their economy and their normal way of life.
Just on that, to what extent could this be a useful experiment? If you get a lot of people infected from these protests, it obviously shows you that that the virus is out there and infecting people in our community. If there's nothing discernible from them, will it give you more confidence in lifting some of these other restrictions?
Well, both could be a possibility, Chris. I think you've pointed to what we would term a natural experiment that society often puts itself through by function of society being a very, very complex beast where, you know, people do feel passionate about issues, they do want to protest, and so we potentially did get such a natural experiment on the weekend. What we can't do, of course, is speculate on what will actually happen, because that will take several weeks to unfold. And we just say to the protesters, if you were there and you do get unwell, get yourself tested, because that's how we're going to keep COVID-19 under control.
Yeah, you're saying that it's unrealistic to do what the AMA are suggesting, that is everybody who is at a protest self-isolate for 14 days, but obviously those other messages about if you're unwell, don't turn up at work, if you are unwell, get tested, do apply, I suppose, with bells on after these protests.
All those recommendations apply, and even more so if you've been to a mass gathering, Chris. Absolutely. I think that you know, the requirement to self-isolate for 14 days would be a highly precautionary approach. People may wish to do that if it's an option available to them. Of course, the way to avoid all of this is actually not to go to the protest in the first place, which I think is the observation you made earlier.
Just finally, Nick, we're doing very well in this country, less than 500 active cases, but you've got to dip your lid across the ditch, don't you? New Zealand, no active cases as of today.
Well, this is just a great result for New Zealand. I've got a brother and sister-in-law over there, and I know they'll be looking forward to enjoying the lifting of their restrictions. We have been in a very different situation with a much larger throughput of international travellers coming back to Australia. We've got larger caseloads, and at the end of the day, we didn't have to lock down quite as strictly as the New Zealanders did. But kudos to them. They've done a great job. It's a different situation over here, and we'll both look forward to working together as countries in the future.
Plenty of viewers of this station in New Zealand. Don't say we don't. We always forget about you. Good stuff. Thanks for joining us again, Nick Coatsworth. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, well done, New Zealand. No coronavirus, no snakes. No wonder we love it.